The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the guests appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of 8 News Now or Nexstar Media Group.
So we have our plans ready. We've prepared for this, as it has all the other dispensaries.
Tonight on Politics Now, the city of Las Vegas approves marijuana consumption lounges, the timeline for getting them up and running, and where they can go.
When we found out we didn't get any licenses, I was just flabbergasted.
Plus, I have obtained documents that reveal for the first time how new marijuana licenses were scored.
And the dealer struck over that secret plutonium shipment to Nevada. What Nevada gives up in return for having it removed.
From 8 News Now, this is Politics Now with Steve Sebelius and Patrick Walker.
The city of Las Vegas voted this week to move forward with marijuana consumption lounges. Thanks for joining us. I'm Steve Sebelius.
And I'm Patrick Walker. Las Vegas, the first city now in Nevada to allow them. And to answer that first question, they're expected to be up and running in as soon as 4 months. Now, I'm told marijuana dispensaries, at least some of them in the city limits, have started applying for a special use permit for cannabis consumption lounges. Here are the rules. They cannot be located within 1,000 feet of schools and casinos. They cannot be in the same suite as a dispensary, but they can be next door. This closes a major loophole that was created 2 years ago when recreational marijuana sales began, but with no place for tourists to consume it. That came to a head Wednesday as the City Council debated moving forward with the lounges.
This proposal, we'd like to see what the legislature decides, as well as the recommendations of the governor's advisory panel.
Well, we can't wait for the state to act. You know, before they got in their fight up there, they were modeling that bill up there after hours.
Well, that ended up passing 4-1. Councilman Stavros Anthony, the lone dissenting vote. Mayor Carolyn Goodman abstaining from the vote, citing family ties to marijuana dispensaries. For the first year, only existing dispensary owners can apply for that special use permit. There are currently 12 dispensaries within the city limits.
Expanding Nevada's marijuana industry has become a very controversial process, punctuated by lawsuits by existing dispensaries that claim they were left out of the next round of licenses.
Yeah, it's an issue that we have been looking into extensively for the past 5 months since the state issued 61 new provisional dispensary licenses. This week, the legislature passed a bill that would add some transparency to the licensing process, but up until now, it's been shrouded in secrecy, and for the first time, I've obtained some documents that tell us exactly how those licenses were scored. When the owners of the Grove dispensary near the Thomas and Mack Center learned they were denied new licenses, it came as a surprise.
When we found out we didn't get any licenses, I was just flabbergasted.
Co-owner John Ritter says the dispensary has been used as a model for state regulators when giving tours to officials from other states who come to Las Vegas to learn about how the Silver State's marijuana industry functions. The Department of Taxation, which oversees the marijuana industry, only tells a business whether it was approved or denied for a license and allows them to view how they scored in a number of areas. The department, citing regulations, says the scores and the applications themselves are not public information. Ritter says he would have been happy to cut his losses if he could understand why his application received the scores it did and how those compared to other successful applications.
They would just show your scores, and the minute that you started asking questions, they'd say, oh, we can't answer that, can't answer that, can't answer that.
When we first tried to get answers, our requests to see the applications or some of the information from them were denied. Now, people who have seen the information are showing us examples of what is catching their attention. Essence Dispensaries was awarded the highest amount of new dispensary provisional licenses, 8, spread out across the state. On 2 of the applications, one source pointed out that the same 3 graders gave the same scores on 10 of the 24 criteria, and in each of those cases, one grader was only 1 point off from the other 2. The combined summary scores between the 2 applications mirror each other, with one exception. The applications were scored on 3 different days. The concern raised, how can the scores for 2 different locations be so similar? In January, we were made aware that at least one tax commissioner had some questions as well, and through a public records request, we obtained questions about the scoring process that were raised by Commissioner George Kalesis. The agency's responses were not included, and it took a second request for us to obtain those answers. The questions show a concern by Colesis over the specifics of how categories were graded and how the graders, 6 people hired from a temp agency in Carson City, were trained. The department pointed to being able to use its discretion to hire temporary workers and the training of those workers by department staff to use as graders in response to those questions. Commissioner Colesis declined our request for an interview for this story about his concerns. In response to our previous questions of the department about the process and transparency last month, a spokesperson told us, quote, "While we do sympathize with the frustrations of those who did not get licenses, it stands to reason that those entities that submitted the strongest applications and scored the highest would have ranked in the top of the applicant pools within the jurisdictions they applied."
Well, Nevada Senator Catherine Cortez Masto says she has struck a deal with Energy Secretary Rick Perry to get plutonium removed from Nevada. The plutonium was secretly shipped here last year by the DOE. Cortez Masto has been placing holds on pending nominations to fill Energy Department vacancies in response. Now, Perry says the Energy Department will start removing the highly radioactive material by 2021, finishing that task by 2026. As a result, Cortez Masto is dropping those holds that she placed on the Energy Department's nominees. The state of Nevada is still seeking a court order to ban new shipments of plutonium. Steve, does this to you seem like that Nevada got a win out of all of it?
Oh yeah, I don't care what anybody says. It's absolutely a win for Nevada. Not only are we going to remove the half metric ton that has already been shipped here, but there's now a solid promise on the books that no more shipments will be made. And there's also some discrete promises of, you know, exactly what we can track, when something's supposed to happen and when the deadline is. And look, if the Energy Secretary doesn't keep his word, that Catherine Cortez Masto knows how to get his attention, obviously.
Yeah, she's shown that she could do that.
Yeah.
Well, former Nevada Assemblyman Stephen Brooks was arrested again this week. Brooks charged with assault on a protected person, intimidating a police officer, and disorderly conduct. A police report says he threatened several officers during an incident at a convenience store. Brooks went on a downward spiral in February of 2013 when he was arrested for domestic violence and resisting arrest. Then in March of 13, he became the first lawmaker ever expelled from the state legislature after making threats against then-Speaker Marilyn Kirkpatrick. Lawmakers said they no longer felt safe having Brooks in the building. That night, he went on a high-speed chase with California Highway Patrol officers, getting in a fight with police, even hitting one of the dogs. This is video from that arrest. Brooks served 17 months in jail for those charges in California. In 2015, he was given probation on the arrest from 2013 and ordered to undergo a mental health counseling, as part of a plea deal.
Back at the end of 2015, the legislature rushed to Carson City for a special session to approve nearly $40 million in tax cuts so the Chinese company Faraday Future would start building its electric cars in North Las Vegas. That project never materialized. Now, lawmakers, including Senator Ben Kekeffer of Reno, look at those transferable tax credits as a $38 million liability on the state's books. He has a bill to repeal the tax credits, and in a Senate hearing last month, Kekeffer asked his daughter Aspen to explain why.
If you want to flip, or just, you know, you've probably read it, to the text of the repealed section, subsection 3 on page 14, it outlines the amount of transferable tax credits, and it is $9,500 per job, so up to 4,000 jobs, which equals $38 million, which is definitely a substantial amount of money, because think about what you could buy with $38 million. Like, it's very substantial.
It is a substantial amount, and that's part of the issue. Having those tax credits on the books demonstrates the state's commitment to economic development. On the other hand, the hefty hiring and investment requirements in the law are so large, the legislature would probably have to meet again if a new company was willing to make the investment. If they did, they could pass another round of tax credits. By the way, Aspen's presentation was very successful. The bill passed the state Senate 19-2 and was heard in the Assembly's Taxation Committee this week. Only North Las Vegas spoke against it, saying the credits are a critical tool in their efforts to grow business.
I think we could hire Aspen to be our correspondent up in Carson City. Well, an alternative in the run for president.
Why are we looking to people whose careers have been entrenched in the system that got us into this ditch and saying, well, they're the only people we should consider qualified to get us out?
Democratic presidential candidate Marianne Williamson tells us why she thinks she can provide moral clarity for the country as an alternative to the candidates you hear about every
Welcome back to Politics Now.
Marianne Williamson is a motivational speaker and self-help author who lost a race for Congress in California back in 2014.
But now she's one of 21 Democratic candidates hoping to get your vote for president. I sat down with her last week to ask how she thinks she's different from the pack. You sound a lot like candidates such as Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren. Why are you better than them to carry this message?
I have a difficult time saying I'm better than them. I honor greatly all of the people who are running. It's all good, smart people. I just have, in some places, some disagreements. With Bernie and Elizabeth, it's not so much that I disagree, because on most things I agree. But I'm having what I feel is a more expanded conversation. There's a public school principal here in Las Vegas who told me she has elementary school students on suicide watch.
Wow.
And that same public school principal said that while she had applied for a social worker at her school, even though so many of the children are getting their meals every day from the food bank, etc., she was told that it's actually not one of the worst cases, so they can't give her a social worker. So we need a U.S. Department of Children and Youth. We also need a U.S. Department of Peace Building. We need to wage peace, not just prepare for war. So when your national security agenda is run by short-term profits for defense contractors, rather than a true agenda to wage peace, then you get what we've got. We don't have universal health insurance because we can't cut into profits for health insurance companies and big pharma. You know, we don't adequately deal with climate change because God forbid it should cut into short-term profits for fossil fuel companies. We don't have reasonable gun safety laws because God forbid it should cut into short-term profits for gun manufacturers.
In terms of race relations, I know that's a big part of your platform. And the things that you're running on. You've talked about apologizing for slavery, even reparations for slavery. How do you think that would go into effect? Would people accept that?
We need a moral and spiritual awakening in this country. So if people elect me, that means they get that. Where Catholics go to confession, Jews go to Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, people in 12-step recovery programs know they need to take a serious moral inventory and address and acknowledge the exact nature of their character defects. All that a country is a collection of people. America has a couple of character defects we need to address. Racism is a character defect, a national character defect that has been with us from the beginning. I don't think the average American is a racist. I don't. But I do think the average American is undereducated and underinformed about the true history of race in the United States. Reparations carry spiritual force. There is an inherent, we acknowledge a wrong has been done. That's very powerful because that's not just economic restitution, it is a moral and a spiritual restitution. I think it would be such a gift to future generations. The Civil War was over in 1865 and we are still carrying this karmic toxicity and handing it generation to generation to generation. And it's time for our generation to do the next big thing to heal, to reconcile.
A lot of people have gotten elected a lot of times by telling people exactly what they want to hear.
Well, not part of that system. Isn't that the whole point here? Why are we looking to people whose careers have been entrenched in the system that got us into this ditch and saying, well, they're the only people we should consider qualified to get us out of this ditch? I think that is preposterous. In any system, in any business, and in any country, you're going to have to let in the new ideas, guys, if you want to get some new ways forward.
Well, Williamson talked about a lot more, including why she supports public funding of political campaigns and her foreign policy. We put that whole interview on LasVegasNow.com. Look for the political news tab under the news section.
Well, reforming campaign finance.
People are paying attention on both sides of the aisle, and that you need to be more transparent, and hopefully they work to do so.
The voters have the information they need to know, is this candidate owned by this donor or not, as long as it's disclosed.
The Face-Off panel takes on what reforms they think our legislature needs to make, coming up.
And the final word on Nevada's upcoming two-year budget is finally out. The results from the Economic Forum.
healthychildren.org.
Nevada's seen some high-profile lawmakers arrested or forced to resign in recent years because of how they dealt with campaign funds. So far, there is no bill in the legislature to deal with campaign finance reform. But should there be? We asked our face-off panel. From the right, the president of Citizen Outreach, Chuck Muth, and from the left, Deputy Director of Battleborn Progress, Maria Teresa Lieberman.
Campaign finance reform, even though the legislature has particularly been hit hard, that's not something that has come up, and that's always something you would hear maybe in response when you start to hear this. Is this an issue that should be taken up by the legislature?
Totally, and I 100% agree that we need to make some drastic changes. I don't know if they'll happen drastically, but in 2017 there were a few minor bills that were presented, and I think you're going to see more this session and hopefully next session even more. Nevada has some of the worst and weakest campaign finance laws, and we need to do better. We need to do better by the donors and the people that support these candidates to ensure that there's actual measures and laws that can ensure that this kind of stuff doesn't happen anymore. And I think you're going to see some this session, hopefully. I think the legislators on all sides are starting to figure out that this is something that needs to be addressed.
Would campaign finance laws, if they're more strict, would that still dissuade people from trying to break them?
Well, no, it will never dissuade some people from trying to break them. They will always try to find a way to get around it. Here's the thing. Now, philosophically, I am opposed to disclosing donors' names. I mean, we've seen in the past on certain campaigns and in certain issues where once a donor's name is disclosed, they're harassed, their businesses are boycotted. There is a true danger here I mean, the donation should be considered the same as a vote. I mean, it's in the privacy of the voting booth. But I am a realist. I know that's never going to happen. So the drastic change that should happen, one, get rid of contribution limits, because that's what allows you to have, or causes companies like MGM to use 20 different corporate entities to give the maximum $10,000 so that they can give a big donation. They'll find a way. It was like Jurassic Park. Nature will find a way, right? So they'll find a way. What they ought to do is get rid of the campaign limits. However, require full disclosure of every contribution within 48 hours posted on the internet. So at least you've got transparency. It doesn't matter whether MGM gives $10,000 contributions or $100,000.
I know that, when we're trying to hold elected officials accountable on, who are they really voting for on the floor, we sometimes can't see their most recent contributions up to that point. We have to wait a little bit longer, and that's for us, but also for constituents, just for regular people that want to go and see who it is that donated to their elected officials' campaign, needs to be done in a timely manner so that, you aren't seeing things after the election, right before the election, when you might have already voted for the person during early vote.
These donations that happen after the fact, I have personal knowledge of an example of this, perfect example, that just happened this last election cycle. There was a ballot initiative to ban brothels in Lyon County, Nevada. Okay, in order to give money to the PAC that was promoting this, you can't give more than $1,000 or your name is disclosed. But there's a loophole in the law. It says you can give $1,000 per reporting period, and there are 5 reporting periods, but 3 of them are before the election. And so we didn't find out that the sheriff in Lyon County had actually contributed to the effort to shut down the brothels that he regulates until 3 months after the election was already over. Now, fortunately, the voters of Lyon County shot it down 80 to 20%, but that is a huge loophole.
You can also watch the panel debate the state suing drug makers over opioids, the housing crisis, and if the deal to get plutonium out of Nevada that we told you about is a good one. That's on LasVegasNow.com. Look for political news under the News tab. Patrick?
All right, Steve, this is Eye on Carson City, where we're going to tell you about some of the other bills we're keeping an eye on with 30 days now left in the legislative session. Chronic pain patients say a 2017 opioid prescription law didn't leave much room for legitimate patients and cut them off from the drugs they need on a day-to-day basis. So, AB 239 fixes that by creating a way for doctors to continue prescribing those drugs to patients over the long term. That bill had its first hearing in the Senate this week. Also, the Assembly passed a bill that would reverse the 2015 Republican-led law on prevailing wages for school construction. AB 136 now heads to the state Senate. Assembly Speaker Jason Frierson called it a huge step for working class families. Then Governor Brian Sandoval vetoed a similar bill in the 2017 session, saying it would lead to rising school construction costs. And the Economic Forum was this week with a little bit of extra money in the budget, so a little good news there. Lawmakers will have an extra $42.8 million to work with. That includes the $20 million that came from the Gaming Control Board settlement with Wynn Resorts, which means that it won't be expected to fund ongoing expenses. It's a one-time windfall. Democrats have pledged not to raise taxes, but there are more than 150 bills in the Senate Finance Committee with a financial impact right now, so we'll be keeping an eye on it. Well, former Vice President Al Gore was in town this week talking about, you guessed it, climate change.
He was on the campus of UNLV and met with students of the UNLV's 2020 Solar Decathlon team. A recent report showed Las Vegas is one of the fastest warming cities in the country. Gore says Las Vegas is already ahead of the curve in helping stop that trend.
These kids are part of a statewide and citywide effort to really provide leadership. Las Vegas is #1 in the mountain region in the installation of solar, for example. And as the cost continues coming down and down and down, it's taking over from fossil fuels. It will take a little more time before that's a completed transition, but that's good news.
When asked what he thought about the very crowded field of Democratic candidates for president, he said, quote, "There sure are a lot of people in it," unquote. Nothing gets by him, and added, a new poll asked Democratic voters what their most important issues were heading into the 2020 election. He was happy to hear #1, climate change.
All right, this is what to watch, what we tell you about what we are keeping an eye on next week. Now, we told you earlier in the show that the bill to put transparency in pot licensing is passed out of both houses of the state legislature, so we're keeping an eye on when and if the governor plans to sign it next week. Also, tomorrow, Bill and Hillary Clinton will be at the Park Theater at Park MGM. It's part of their speaking tour, so you would have had to have already bought tickets to go. They will be here in town for a May 5th, a Cinco de Mayo event.
So, presidential candidates and now former presidents and would-be presidents are visiting Las Vegas.
That's right, and the president just recently, so there you go.
They can't stay away. Well, that's our show. Thanks very much for watching Politics Now. You can email me at ssebelius@lasvegasnow.com.
My email is pwalker@lasvegasnow.com. Stay up to date online and watch us right here every Saturday.